You are lying in bed tonight, staring at the ceiling, and suddenly a thought pierces through your mind like lightning. What if this were your last night on earth? What if in 7 minutes after your final breath, something extraordinary happens that most people have never even considered? Tonight, I want to share with you what Saint Ignatius of Loyola discovered about those crucial first moments after we leave this world, and why understanding this could completely transform how you live starting tomorrow morning. Picture this scene with me for a moment. A hospital room at 3 in the morning. The machines have gone quiet. A soul has just departed from this earthly realm. But here is what most people do not realize. According to the profound spiritual insights of Saint Ignatius, those first 7 minutes after death are not what you think. They are not a void. They are not darkness. They are not confusion. They are the most awakening, the most clarifying, the most profoundly illuminating moments that any human soul can experience. And what happens in those 7 minutes will determine everything about your eternal destiny. Saint Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits and one of the greatest spiritual masters who ever walked this earth, spent his entire life preparing souls for this exact moment. Through his spiritual exercises, through his teachings on discernment, through his deep understanding of the spiritual realm, he mapped out precisely what occurs when our souls cross that threshold between time and eternity. And what he discovered will shake you to your very core. In those first 7 minutes after your heart stops beating, your soul does not sleep. It does not wander aimlessly. It does not get lost in some cosmic confusion. Instead, according to Ignatius, your soul experiences what he called the great illumination. Every choice you ever made, every moment you chose love over selfishness, every time you picked up your cross and followed Christ, every instant you chose God's will over your own desires, all of it becomes crystal clear in a way that makes everything you thought you understood about life seem like shadows on a wall. Ignatius taught that in these 7 minutes, your soul sees with perfect clarity the difference between what he called the two standards. Throughout your entire earthly life, you have been choosing between these two banners, these two ways of living, often without even realizing it. The standard of Christ, which leads to humility, to service, to true spiritual riches that cannot rust or decay, and the standard of the evil one, which leads to pride, to the accumulation of earthly honors and possessions that ultimately turn to dust. In those 7 minutes after death, every single choice you made under one standard or the other becomes visible to your soul with overwhelming clarity. But here is what will truly amaze you about Ignatius's understanding of death. He believed that those 7 minutes are not a judgment imposed upon you from outside. They are a moment of perfect self-recognition. Your soul, freed from the limitations of your physical brain, freed from the distractions of the material world, freed from the constant noise that drowns out the voice of God in everyday life, finally sees itself as it truly is. And in that moment of perfect clarity, you understand with absolute certainty whether you chose to live for God or for yourself. This is why Ignatius spent so much time teaching people how to examine their conscience daily. This is why he developed what he called the examen, that spiritual practice of reviewing each day to see where God was present and where you responded to his grace or turned away from it, because Ignatius understood that death is not some distant event that happens to other people. Death is the moment toward which every single day of your life has been pointing. And those 7 minutes after your final breath are the culmination of every spiritual choice you have made since the day you were born. Let me paint this picture even more vividly for you. Imagine your soul in those 7 minutes experiencing what Ignatius called perfect consolation or perfect desolation. If you have lived a life oriented toward God, if you have practiced what he called finding God in all things, if you have made the daily choice to die to yourself so that Christ might live in you, then those 7 minutes become a foretaste of eternal joy that no human language could ever adequately describe. Your soul recognizes itself as beloved by the Creator of the universe, as someone who chose love over fear, service over selfishness, humility over pride. But if you have lived primarily for yourself, if you have consistently chosen earthly comforts over spiritual growth, if you have ignored the gentle voice of God calling you to conversion day after day, then those 7 minutes become a moment of profound recognition of what you have lost. Not because God is punishing you, but because your own choices have formed you into someone who cannot receive the infinite love that God is constantly offering. This is the genius of Ignatian spirituality. Ignatius understood that God never forces himself upon anyone. In those 7 minutes after death, your soul simply becomes fully aware of the person you have chosen to become through thousands of small daily decisions. And that recognition determines your eternal destiny, not through some external verdict, but through the simple reality of spiritual compatibility or incompatibility with the source of all love. Now I want to pause here for a moment and connect with something you might be feeling right now. As I describe these 7 minutes after death, are you experiencing a sense of anxiety? A fear that maybe you have not lived the kind of life that would prepare you for such a moment of perfect clarity? Are you thinking about choices you have made, words you have spoken, opportunities for love and service that you let slip by? If you are feeling that stirring in your heart right now, I want you to know that you are not alone in this recognition. Saint Ignatius himself experienced profound fear and trembling when he first began to understand the weight of our spiritual choices. If this is touching something deep in your soul, I invite you to share it in the comments. You can simply write the words, "I want to be ready." And if you feel comfortable, tell us what is stirring in your heart as you think about these 7 minutes. Your willingness to be vulnerable about your spiritual concerns could be exactly what someone else needs to read today, to know they are not alone in their desire to live more authentically for God. Sometimes the simple act of admitting that we want to change our lives is the first step toward the conversion that makes all the difference in those crucial moments after death. But here is the beautiful truth that Ignatius discovered, and that I want to share with you right now. Those 7 minutes after death are not the first time your soul encounters this moment of perfect clarity. According to Ignatius, God gives you practice runs throughout your entire earthly life. Every time you pray, every time you examine your conscience, every time you experience what he called spiritual consolation or desolation, you are getting a glimpse of what those 7 minutes will reveal in their fullness. This is why Ignatius developed such detailed methods for spiritual discernment. He wanted people to learn, while they were still alive, how to recognize the movements of God in their souls. He wanted them to practice choosing the way of Christ over the way of the world, so that when death came, it would not be a shock or a surprise, but rather the natural culmination of a lifetime spent learning to see with spiritual eyes. Think about the times in your life when you have felt most alive, most connected to something greater than yourself, most aware that you were living for a purpose beyond your own comfort and security. According to Ignatius, those moments are previews of what your soul will experience in those 7 minutes after death if you have chosen to live for God. The peace you feel when you forgive someone who has hurt you deeply. The joy you experience when you sacrifice your own desires to serve someone in need. The sense of rightness you feel when you choose honesty, even when it costs you something. All of these experiences are your soul learning to recognize its true home. On the other hand, think about the times when you have felt most empty, most disconnected, most aware that you were living for things that ultimately do not matter. The hollowness you feel after pursuing pleasure that leaves you more hungry than before. The anxiety that comes from trying to build your identity on achievements or possessions or other people's approval. The restlessness that haunts you when you ignore the voice of conscience calling you to something higher. According to Ignatius, these experiences of spiritual desolation are also preparation for those 7 minutes after death. They are warning signals, wake-up calls, invitations to change direction before it is too late. This is the profound mercy of God that Ignatius understood so clearly. Every single day of your life, you are being given opportunities to practice dying well. Every moment of prayer, every act of service, every choice to put God's will before your own preferences, every decision to love when it would be easier to remain indifferent, all of these are rehearsals for the great moment when your soul will see itself with perfect clarity. But Ignatius also understood that most people sleepwalk through life without recognizing these opportunities. They get so caught up in the urgency of immediate concerns, so distracted by the constant noise of a world that demands their attention every waking moment, that they never stop to consider the eternal significance of their daily choices. They live as if they had forever to figure things out, as if death were something that happens only to other people, as if those 7 minutes after their final breath were so far in the future that they need not concern themselves with preparation. This is why Ignatius insisted on the daily exam. Every evening he encouraged people to spend 15 minutes reviewing their day, not to judge themselves harshly, but to notice where God was present and where they responded to his invitations or failed to recognize them. This simple practice, done consistently over time, trains the soul to see with spiritual eyes while still living in this physical world. It prepares you for the perfect clarity that will come in those 7 minutes after death by helping you develop that clarity gradually throughout your life. Imagine if you started tonight, before you go to sleep, to spend just 10 minutes thinking about your day with the eyes of eternity. Where did you encounter opportunities to choose love over fear, service over selfishness, trust in God over anxiety about things you cannot control? Where did you feel spiritually alive, connected to your deepest purpose? And where did you feel spiritually dead, going through motions without any real engagement of your heart? This simple practice, according to Ignatius, is one of the most powerful ways to prepare your soul for those 7 minutes that will determine everything. But let me tell you about an even more profound aspect of what Ignatius discovered about death. He believed that in those 7 minutes after your final breath, you do not encounter God as a stranger. You meet him as someone you have either been getting to know throughout your whole life, or someone you have been avoiding and running from for years. The quality of that encounter depends entirely on the relationship you have been building or neglecting every single day since you first became capable of choosing between good and evil. This is why Ignatius emphasized so strongly what he called finding God in all things. He wanted people to learn to recognize God's presence not just in church or during formal prayers, but in every conversation, every challenge, every joy, every sorrow, every mundane task of daily life. Because if you learn to see God everywhere while you are alive, then death becomes not a leap into the unknown, but a coming home to someone you have been walking with all along. Picture a person who has spent years in friendship with Christ, who has learned to turn to him in every difficulty, who has practiced surrendering their will to God's will through countless small acts of trust and obedience. For such a person, those 7 minutes after death become like finally seeing face to face someone they have loved from a distance their entire life. The recognition is immediate, joyful, peaceful. There is no fear because there is no stranger. There is only the deepest love they have ever known, revealed now in its full glory. But picture someone who has spent their life treating God as an abstract concept, someone to call upon only in emergencies, someone whose existence makes no practical difference in their daily decisions and priorities. For such a person, those 7 minutes after death become a moment of profound disorientation. Not because God is angry or rejecting them, but because they have never learned the spiritual language needed to recognize and receive infinite love. This is the tragedy that Ignatius saw so clearly. It is not that God condemns anyone to hell. It is that some souls, through their own choices, make themselves incapable of receiving the heaven that God is constantly offering. They have trained themselves to find satisfaction in things that are finite and temporary. When they encounter the infinite and eternal source of all satisfaction, they literally do not know what to do with it. It is like someone who has spent their entire life eating junk food suddenly being offered the most exquisite gourmet meal ever prepared. Their taste buds have been so conditioned to artificial flavors that they cannot appreciate true nourishment. But here is the hope that burns at the heart of everything Ignatius taught. As long as you are still breathing, as long as your heart is still beating, it is never too late to begin training your soul for those 7 minutes after death. Every moment of every day offers you a choice between the finite and the infinite, between the temporary and the eternal, between self-centeredness and God-centeredness. And every choice you make in the direction of God, no matter how small it seems, is preparation for the perfect joy that awaits those who have learned to recognize love itself. This is why Ignatius was so passionate about what he called the magis, always choosing the more universal good, always asking not just what is good, but what is better, always seeking to love and serve God more completely, because he understood that those 7 minutes after death are not a test you take cold. They are the natural result of a lifetime of spiritual preparation, the harvest of seeds you have been planting every single day through your choices, your priorities, your response to God's grace. Let me share with you one of the most powerful exercises that Ignatius developed to help people prepare for death. He encouraged them to imagine themselves on their deathbed, looking back over their entire life, and asking what they would wish they had done differently. Not in order to fill themselves with regret, but in order to gain the clarity needed to start living differently right now, while there is still time to change direction. What would you wish you had valued more highly if you were lying on your deathbed tonight? Would you wish you had spent more time in prayer? More time building real relationships with people instead of chasing after achievements that ultimately did not matter? Would you wish you had been more generous with your time and resources? More forgiving of people who hurt you? More willing to take risks for the sake of love? Would you wish you had worried less about what other people thought of you and focused more on what God was calling you to become? This exercise is not meant to make you feel guilty about the past. It is meant to give you the gift of perspective while you still have time to act on what you discover. Because those 7 minutes after death will bring perfect clarity about what really mattered and what was just distraction. Ignatius wanted people to gain some of that clarity while they were still alive, so they could live their remaining days in a way that aligned with eternal values rather than temporary illusions. Now I want to tell you about something even more extraordinary that Ignatius discovered about those 7 minutes after death. He believed that in that moment of perfect clarity, your soul not only sees the choices you made during your earthly life, but also sees the ripple effects of every single decision. The way your choices influenced other people for good or ill, the eternal consequences of words you spoke and actions you took that you might have forgotten completely by the time you died. Imagine discovering in those 7 minutes that a simple act of kindness you performed, without thinking about it deeply, influenced someone else to choose hope over despair, and that their renewed hope led them to touch other lives in ways that created cascades of goodness through generations. Or imagine seeing how a moment of selfishness or cruelty set off ripples of pain that affected people you never even knew existed. According to Ignatius, those 7 minutes after death reveal not just your individual spiritual state, but your connection to the whole web of human relationships and your responsibility for the spiritual welfare of others. This understanding completely changes how you might think about the significance of your daily choices. That moment when you are tempted to speak harshly to someone who has irritated you. That opportunity to go out of your way to help someone even when it is inconvenient. That choice between telling the truth and saying what people want to hear. All of these seemingly small decisions carry eternal weight not just for your own soul, but for the souls of everyone your life touches directly or indirectly. This is why Ignatius emphasized so strongly the importance of living for the greater glory of God, rather than for your own comfort or recognition. He understood that those 7 minutes after death would reveal the true scope of what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. You would see clearly how interconnected all human souls really are, how your spiritual health or sickness affects the whole body of Christ in ways you could never imagine while limited by earthly perspective. But here again, the mercy of God shines through even this sobering reality. Ignatius taught that every single day offers you multiple opportunities to contribute to the spiritual welfare of others through small acts of love, patience, forgiveness, and service. You do not need to be a great saint or a famous missionary to participate in the salvation of the world. You need only to respond generously to the opportunities for love that God places in your path every ordinary day. Think about the people in your life right now who are struggling, who are discouraged, who have lost their way spiritually. According to what Ignatius understood about those 7 minutes after death, your response to their needs, your willingness to be an instrument of God's grace in their lives, will be revealed in its full eternal significance when your soul sees with perfect clarity. Every time you choose to pray for someone instead of judging them, every time you offer encouragement instead of criticism, every time you extend forgiveness instead of holding grudges, you are participating in the work of salvation in ways that will only become fully visible after death. This brings me to one of the most beautiful aspects of what Ignatius taught about dying. He believed that for souls who have learned to live for God, rather than for themselves, those 7 minutes after death become a moment of overwhelming gratitude. Not just gratitude for being saved from eternal punishment, but gratitude for having been allowed to participate in God's work of love during their earthly life. The recognition that every opportunity to love, every chance to serve, every moment of suffering offered up for others, was actually God inviting you to share in His own divine life and mission. Imagine the joy of a soul who discovers in those 7 minutes after death that their ordinary life of faithful service actually contributed to the eternal happiness of people they loved. Imagine the wonder of seeing how their prayers were answered in ways they never knew, how their sacrifices bore fruit they never witnessed, how their simple fidelity to God's will participated in miracles they never suspected. This is the reward that Ignatius promised to those who learn to live each day for the greater glory of God, rather than for their own glory. But even this extraordinary vision of death as the revelation of love's triumph leads to an even more profound truth that Ignatius discovered. Those 7 minutes after death are not the end of the story. They are the moment when your soul finally understands what it was created for from the very beginning. All the longing you have felt throughout your life, all the sense that you were made for something greater than what this world offers, all the holy restlessness that drives you to seek meaning and purpose beyond material success, all of this finds its explanation and fulfillment in what Ignatius called the beatific vision. In those 7 minutes, souls who have prepared themselves through a lifetime of choosing God over self discover that everything they ever truly wanted, every authentic desire of their heart, was actually a desire for God that they sometimes mistook for desires for lesser things. The love they sought in human relationships was a participation in divine love. The beauty that moved them in nature and art was a reflection of the beauty of the Creator. The truth they pursued in learning and wisdom was a share in the mind of God. The goodness they tried to practice in their moral choices was a participation in the very life of God. This is why Ignatius taught people not to despise their deepest desires, but to purify them and trace them back to their ultimate source in God Himself. Because those 7 minutes after death reveal that God has been the object of every authentic longing you have ever felt, even when you thought you were seeking something else entirely. As I near the end of our time together, I want to offer you something practical that you can do starting tonight to begin preparing your soul for those 7 minutes after death. Before you go to sleep, spend 5 minutes asking yourself these 3 questions that come directly from the heart of Ignatian spirituality. First, where did I experience God's love today, even if I did not recognize it at the time? Second, how did I respond to opportunities to love others, and where did I miss chances to be an instrument of God's grace? Third, what is God inviting me to change or deepen in my life? And how can I say yes to that invitation tomorrow? These simple questions, asked consistently over time, will gradually train your soul to see with the kind of clarity that will make those 7 minutes after death not a moment of terrifying judgment, but a moment of joyful recognition. You will find yourself becoming more aware of God's presence in ordinary moments, more sensitive to opportunities for love and service, more aligned with eternal values rather than temporary concerns. Do you feel that this message about the 7 minutes after death according to Saint Ignatius has spoken directly to your heart? This channel is a refuge for souls seeking a deeper spiritual life like yours. By subscribing, we will continue exploring together the teachings of the saints that can illuminate your path of faith and prepare you for the most important moments of your existence. Each video is an invitation to remember your true identity as a child of God, destined for eternal joy if you learn to live for love, rather than for fear. I would be honored to accompany you on this spiritual journey of preparation for the life to come. Thank you for dedicating this time to nourishing your soul and preparing for the eternal destiny that awaits us all. Remember, those 7 minutes after death are not a distant concern for some future version of yourself. They are the moment toward which every choice you make today is pointing. The soul you are forming through your daily decisions is the soul that will experience either perfect joy or perfect sorrow when earthly life ends and eternal life begins. Saint Ignatius understood this with crystal clarity, and he spent his entire life helping others understand it too. Now you have that same understanding. The question that remains is what you will do with this gift of perspective, while there is still time to shape your eternal destiny through the choices you make in the precious days that remain to you on this earth.